Today, we're talking about a classic horror movie, The Hills Have Eyes. This film is just as intense as Wrong Turn, and it takes the brutality and bloodlust of the mutants to another level. The movie begins with some background information. Between 1945 and 1962, the United States conducted 331 airborne nuclear tests. However, they refused to admit that radioactive fallout caused genetic mutations. Even today, radiation dust continues to linger over the New Mexico desert. On this day, 4 radiation inspectors arrive at the site for an inspection. Suddenly, a bloodied man stumbles toward them, screaming for help. The inspectors step back in shock, but before they can react, a bullet blasts through his head. The remaining 3 inspectors are also attacked. A pickaxe slams into their backs repeatedly, making escape impossible. Before they realize what's happening, they are all brutally killed. Their bodies are then chained to the back of a truck and dragged away. Years later, a gas station stands alone in the desert, run by an old man. Hearing strange noises outside, he grabs his gun and steps out. After a quick inspection, he walks to the entrance of a mine and shouts inside, "I told you, I'm done. This has nothing to do with me. Do you hear me?" After scanning the area, he returns to his room. Inside, his room is filled with bags of valuable items, completely out of place in such a desolate location. As he examines the goods, a car horn outside grabs his attention. Stepping outside, he sees a man and his family of 7. They are on a road trip and have stopped for gas and a break. The group includes Bob and Ethel, their daughter Lynn, her husband Doug, their newborn baby, Brenda and Bobby. They also have 2 dogs. While refueling, Brenda and Bobby spot a pig in a cage and find it amusing. Doug tries to make a phone call for work, but there's no signal in the desert. Once the gas is filled, they prepare to leave. Suddenly, one of the dogs runs into the store and Lynn rushes in to retrieve it. While searching, she accidentally enters the old man's room and sees a bag filled with gold and jewelry. She doesn't think much of it, grabs the dog, and walks away. The old man blocks her path, but after a brief explanation, Lynn leaves without trouble. However, after she's gone, the old man notices the bag slightly open. His expression darkens as he walks over to Bob's window. He suggests a shortcut, telling Bob, 2 miles ahead, turn left onto a dirt road. It'll save you a few hours and get you out of the desert faster. Bob and Ethel trust his advice, thank him, and continue their journey. Unfortunately, the RV's air conditioning breaks down. Under the blazing desert sun, they take the shortcut, but they don't get far before, bang! A spiked trap suddenly bursts from the ground, blowing out their tires. The RV loses control, crashes into rocks, and is completely wrecked. Even stranger, the spikes are mysteriously pulled away, leaving them confused about what just happened. No one is injured, but they are all shaken. The dogs take off running, forcing Bob to stay behind to fix the car while Bobby goes after them alone. Doug tries to call for help, but there's no signal at all. Bob quickly realizes the car is beyond repair. They are stranded in the middle of nowhere, far from help in either direction. With no other choice, Bob decides they should split up. Doug heads downhill to find help, while Bob goes uphill and will return if he finds nothing. Meanwhile, Bobby manages to catch both dogs and starts heading back, but as he walks away, someone watches from the cliffs above. Back at the RV, Bob hands Bobby a gun and tells him to protect Ethel and Lynn. Doug refuses a gun, insisting he's better with his brain than a weapon. While Lynn is packing up their belongings, she notices a glint of light reflecting from the hills. She pauses, feeling uneasy. But before she can react, Bobby jumps out and startles her. When she looks back at the hills, the reflection is gone. She assumes it was just a piece of glass and doesn't think much of it. Once everything is ready, Bob and Doug head off in separate directions. What they don't know is someone is watching them through binoculars. The rest of the family stays behind and enjoys dinner. Brenda gets up to grab some fruit, but as soon as she opens the door, the dog bolts outside again. Bobby sighs in frustration. He just spent all that time catching the dog, and now it's gone again. With no choice, he chases after it. But as he turns a corner, the dog is nowhere in sight. Suddenly, a shadow flickers behind him. Bobby freezes. Something feels wrong. He crouches and grabs a rock as a weapon. But nothing happens. He shakes it off and keeps searching. Then, he sees it, a pool of blood on the ground. Following the trail, he discovers his dog's lifeless body. Terror floods his face as he steps closer. The dog's insides are completely hollowed out, with clean, sharp cuts. It's obvious. This wasn't an accident. Someone did this. Panic sets in and Bobby turns to run. But in his haste, he trips and falls down a ravine. He hits the ground hard and blacks out. Then, a small, disfigured girl appears. She watches him without making a move. It didn't seem like she wanted to hurt Bobby. She was just watching him. Suddenly, a mutant appeared above, gnawing on a dog's leg. Meanwhile, Doug, searching for help, came across a massive pit filled with abandoned cars. The sight was unsettling, so he climbed down and found a teddy bear inside one of the vehicles, thinking it might be a nice toy for the baby. As time passed, the sun began to set. Bob followed the road back to the gas station, hoping to call for the old man's help. But no one answered, no matter how many times he called out. Seeing no one around, he picked up the phone to call for help, only to realize it was broken. When he stepped inside, he spotted the bag of gold and jewelry, and inside one of the boxes was a severed human ear. That's when Bob knew something was very wrong. He pulled out his gun for protection. As he moved deeper inside, he saw old newspapers and photographs on the wall, and suddenly, everything made sense. Years ago, the military arrived to establish a new nuclear testing site, but the locals refused to give up their land and hid inside the mines instead. Because of the nuclear experiments, the children born here developed severe deformities. Eventually, the military abandoned the site, but in the following years, people in the desert started disappearing. Bob began to panic. He rushed outside, jumped into the old man's truck, and tried to start the engine to get back to his family. But just as he was about to drive away, he heard noises coming from the restroom. He opened the door and found the old man sitting inside, drinking and sobbing, muttering nonsense. Bob told him to put the gun down and talk things out. But suddenly, the old man apologized, then turned the gun on himself and pulled the trigger. At that moment, voices echoed from the darkness. Bob ran to the truck, but before he could react, he saw a deformed man sitting inside. The mutant grabbed his head and slammed it into the windshield, knocking him out cold. They then dragged him away in a cart, taking him into the mines. Meanwhile, Lynn noticed that Bobby hadn't returned from searching for the dog. She grabbed a flashlight and went out to look for him. Back in the ravine, the little mutant girl stayed beside Bobby, seemingly protecting him from danger. When she heard voices calling, she finally left his side. Lynn found Bobby and helped him back to the RV. But Bobby didn't tell anyone about the dead dog. Instead, he focused on whether the radio had received any signals. Lynn mentioned that the radio kept picking up strange breathing sounds, almost like a creepy stalker was on the other end. Just then, the other dog started barking outside. Bobby immediately sensed danger. He grabbed his gun and told Ethel and Lynn to stay inside. When he got outside, the dog was gone. As he tried calling its name, Doug returned with the teddy bear and supplies. Still, Bobby kept the truth to himself. He shouldered everything alone, saying nothing about what he had seen. Doug then told everyone about what he had found earlier. A few miles ahead, there's a huge pit full of abandoned cars. It's obvious this isn't a shortcut. This is just desert. Lynn, still naive, insisted that they must have missed a turn somewhere and remained hopeful that Bob would find the right way back. Meanwhile, the other dog had picked up the scent of its companion. When it found the dead body, it was overcome with grief. Back at the RV, Bobby knew they were in danger. He insisted that everyone stay inside and sleep in the RV. Doug, however, refused. "Come on, this RV is tiny. You really expect all of us to squeeze in here?" Bobby pulled Doug aside, wanting to finally tell him the truth. But he hesitated and couldn't get the words out. Doug reassured him, "Bob will be back soon. Lynn and I will sleep in the Jeep. You three stay here in the RV. If Bob isn't back by morning, we'll go look for him together." Bobby reluctantly agreed. That night, Bobby couldn't sleep at all. Then, a noise outside. He thought the dog had returned. Grabbing his gun, he stepped out to check. At that very moment, a mutant slipped inside the RV. He pulled back Brenda's blanket, drool dripping from his mouth. Outside, Bobby wandered for a long time, but something felt off. He realized that the sounds weren't from his dog. It was a mutant imitating them. A chilling realization hit him. His family was in danger. Panicked, he ran back and woke up Doug. He finally told him everything. "There are others in the desert. They killed the dog. I didn't say anything earlier because I didn't want to scare everyone, especially Ethel." But it's not safe out here, and Bob still isn't back. Doug realized the seriousness of the situation. He told Lynn to stay inside, while he and Bobby went to check around. Meanwhile, the mutant inside the RV had Brenda pinned down. Hearing someone approach, he radioed his partner. Suddenly, a huge fire erupted in the distance. Bob was tied to a tree, engulfed in flames. The fire and Bob's screams woke Ethel and Lynn, and all four of them rushed out to try and save him. But they didn't realize this was just a distraction. The real target was the RV, where Brenda and the baby were left behind. Inside the RV, two mutants appeared, Jupiter, the thin one, and Pluto, the heavy one. Jupiter walked inside and saw Brenda. He grabbed her and started biting her. Pluto, on the other hand, tried to assault her, but Jupiter stopped him, beating Pluto until he kept quiet. Brenda screamed and struggled, but no one could hear her. Then, the baby started crying. Pluto froze, staring at the child. For a moment, he looked almost calm, as if remembering something from his own past. Meanwhile, outside, the four were desperately trying to put out the fire. They sprayed the extinguisher for what felt like forever, but by the time the flames died down, Bob was already gone. Lynn, in shock, decided to take Ethel back to the RV. But as they got closer, she noticed something was wrong. She rushed ahead alone and found Jupiter holding the baby while Pluto restrained Brenda. Without thinking, Lynn grabbed a frying pan and knocked Jupiter down. But before she could grab the baby, Jupiter pulled out a gun and aimed it at the child, warning her to stay still. Ethel sensed something was wrong. She picked up a rock and approached the RV. Inside, she saw Jupiter assaulting Lynn. Seizing the moment, she lifted the rock and swung it down. But Pluto let out a roar, alerting Jupiter. Before Ethel could strike, Jupiter spun around and shot her, sending her flying backward. Finally, the gunshot caught Bobby and Doug's attention. Lynn took the chance to grab a screwdriver and stab Jupiter. Jupiter retaliated immediately, shooting Lynn and ending her life. After dealing with her, the two mutants were ready to take Brenda and the baby back with them. They wanted to kill Brenda in front of Bobby and Doug. But just as Jupiter pulled the trigger, his revolver ran out of bullets. Frustrated, they left Brenda behind and took the baby instead. Bobby fired several shots, but he missed every time. When they returned to the RV, they discovered Bob's body had been dragged away. Not far away, a mutant was watching through binoculars, completely focused on the scene. So focused, in fact, that he didn't notice the dog sneaking up behind him. With a sudden leap, the dog bit into his throat. Inside the RV, Bobby stared at the wrecked interior. Anger boiled inside him as he grabbed his gun, ready to hunt down the mutants for revenge. Doug stopped him, telling him they needed to stay calm. If we rush in without a plan, we'll just be walking into their trap. As they argued, a sound came from outside. The radio was crackling. Doug stepped outside and found a severed hand holding a walkie-talkie.
I told you. What? I told you.
It was a gift from the dog, the mutant it had just killed. Listening to the radio, they heard mutants talking about wiping them all out. Doug grabbed the walkie-talkie and demanded answers, but no one responded. Instead, the only sound was the baby crying. Doug made up his mind. At sunrise, he would fight to the death. The next morning, at dawn, Doug set off with the dog, following the scent trail to the mine. They followed the bloodstains deeper inside, discovering old photographs, likely the burial site of the mutants' past relatives. Exiting the mine, they came across a small, eerie town. Doug tried to radio Bobby from the RV, but there was no response. Meanwhile, Brenda lit a pile of tires on fire, hoping the thick smoke would attract attention. Bobby set up traps around the RV, stringing wires in a circle to detect movement. Doug ventured into the silent, unsettling town. Following a trail of white smoke, he found an engine still running. Peering through a window, he saw the baby lying on a bed. He was about to go inside, but the dog wanted to attack first. Doug stopped the dog, choosing to hide inside a car and lock the dog inside for safety. Alone, Doug sneaked into the house to rescue the baby. Inside, he found a mutant watching TV. Quietly, Doug picked up the baby and tried to leave, But before he could escape, he blacked out. When he woke up, he was locked inside a box. The box was filled with corpses. Using all his strength, he smashed his way out. Meanwhile, the dog dug a hole under the car and escaped. Doug stumbled into a diner where he found Bob's corpse, roasted like meat, with a chess piece stabbed into his skull. From a nearby room, a haunting song played. Following the sound, he entered a dark room where a mutant in a wheelchair was singing to himself. Doug demanded to know where the baby was, but the mutant only mumbled nonsense about the past experiments and nuclear tests. Suddenly, Pluto smashed through the window with an axe. A brutal fight broke out. Doug was no match for Pluto, and just as Pluto was about to finish him off, the dog leaped in to save Doug. Doug took the chance to escape, grabbing a wooden stick and hiding inside the bathroom, using the bathtub to barricade the door. The dog and Pluto faced off, but Pluto eventually backed off and ran away. Doug prepared himself for battle. Suddenly, Pluto burst through the door and a vicious fight broke out in the bathroom. Pluto swung the axe wildly, but Doug managed to dodge every attack. Seizing an opportunity, Doug stabbed Pluto with a wooden stick, but the wound wasn't deep enough. Pluto yanked the stick out and retaliated, chopping off 2 of Doug's fingers with the axe. Fueled by pain and desperation, Doug drove a screwdriver through Pluto's foot, then stabbed a flagpole through his throat, and finally ended Pluto's life with his own axe. Outside, another mutant heard the noise and rushed back. Doug ambushed him at the door, killed him with the axe, and stole his gun. The dog finished off the mutant in the wheelchair. Meanwhile, Jupiter was about to kill the baby, but the little girl mutant appeared and stopped him. At the last moment, Jupiter lunged to kill the baby, but when he opened the blanket, it wasn't a baby. It was a pig. The little girl had already taken the real baby and run away. Back at the RV, Bobby and Brenda's traps were triggered, but it turned out to be just a rolling tumbleweed. When they returned to the RV, they discovered Ethel's body was missing. Bobby told Brenda to stay inside while he followed the blood trail. The trail led him to a mutant feasting on Ethel's corpse. The mutant saw Bobby, but before he could react, Bobby shot him, though it wasn't a fatal wound. Bobby ran back to the RV and rigged a trap. He set up a match at the door, while Brenda filled the RV with gas. The plan was to lure the mutant inside and blow it up, but plans never go as expected. The mutant grabbed Brenda through the window. Bobby tied a rope around the mutant's hands, and he and Brenda escaped through another window. Meanwhile, Doug cut the little girl off, blocking her escape. She finally agreed to return the baby. Just then, Jupiter attacked Doug from above, slamming him to the ground. Doug's gun was knocked away, leaving them to fight hand to hand. Jupiter crushed Doug with a spiked club, but before he could finish him off, the little girl ran away with the baby again. Jupiter chased after her, but Doug grabbed the gun and returned, firing 3 shotgun blasts, finally taking down Jupiter. Thinking it was over, Doug took the baby from the little girl's arms. But Jupiter wasn't dead yet. He got up and tried to attack Doug from behind. Before he could strike, the little girl threw herself at Jupiter, sending both of them tumbling off a cliff. In the end, Doug walked back to the RV with the baby and the dog, the nightmare finally over.